Let me say a little bit about each of these principles. To ensure that government interventions in individual companies are consistent with the President's principle of preserving the private market system, we must design them to be as temporary as possible. That is why it is encouraging that in the wake of the stress tests, major financial institutions were able to raise private capital to replace the government's capital infusions and repay the U.S. Treasury approximately $68 billion at, by the way, a significant profit in just 6 months. It is also why the President was clear and explicit that his objective is to exit the government's investments in auto companies as quickly as is practicable. The person who inherits a structurally deficient house faces a choice. He can make only the necessary structural improvements so the house can pass inspection, or he can take on new renovation projects with the ultimate goal of moving in. With respect to government stakes in major enterprises, our approach is clear. It is the former approach. We do not want to be owners. We want to be stewards to structural soundness and nothing more. And that is why we will work to transfer government holdings into private hands as soon as is practicable. We seek, in part with that objective, and part for its own sake, to assure that our interventions are based on market principles. Private market transactions in situations of economic distress take many different forms. They may involve a range of different types of restructuring. This is also the case in situations of distress where it is necessary for the government to become involved. Our approach seeks to parallel what would be a private sector process. Where possible, we've provided secured loans, such as the various Fed facilities to support the banking system. Where this is not possible, we've sought to provide unsecured debt or preferred stock investments without taking on control rights. Where institutions are fundamentally insolvent and government has had to provide the finance necessary in the context of bankruptcy, we have sought to do so in the same way a private sector lender would have done. I emphasize this point because a number of transactions, particularly the recent Chrysler transaction, have generated some controversy. Let me be clear. In a bankruptcy reorganization, each class of creditors is entitled to no more than they would receive in a liquidation. I am aware of no serious argument that in any transaction in which the government has participated, this criterion has not been met. On the other hand, it is standard practice for those providing capital, the lenders of last resort, to make commercial decisions that end up treating some creditors more generously than they would be treated in the context of a liquidation. For example, in the steel restructurings that took place a few years ago, the private providers of capital chose to provide greater recoveries to the Union Healthcare Trust than they did to companies' other creditors. Those investors made a business judgment that to run steel companies effectively in the future, they needed to maintain a smooth, ongoing relationships with the representatives of their employees. For the same reason, certain creditors of various forms, warranty holders, pension holders, for example, are often treated much more generously than other creditors in standard commercial bankruptcies. From this perspective, there is nothing that should be seen as remarkable about the ways in which finance was provided during the Chrysler or General Motors transactions. This idea of following market principles has shaped what we have done in other respects. Reasonable financiers in the context of bankruptcies do not provide finance so that enterprises can repeat the mistakes that caused them to go bankrupt in the first place. That is why President Obama rejected the first restructuring plans that were put forth by both General Motors and Chrysler, and insisted on much more radical restructurings that provided for profitability even in severe recession conditions, marked by 10 million cars sold a year compared to the 16 or 17 that has been historically normal. That is why, despite sizable government resources, more painful changes, including plant and dealership closings, were necessary. And that's why it will be our objective going forward to act just as any market participant would. This means, in important respects, we will seek to be minimally intrusive. And here is where some difference with the private sector does come in. While we would like to act as a private sector financier could, in the context of intervention in financial institutions or companies, we cannot lose sight of the fact that the government is very different from a private sector actor. The government would be abdicating its responsibility to taxpayers if it did not ensure that financial assistance was deployed in a way that promoted growth and stability. But we must recognize that government officials involved with any company are subject to political pressures of many kinds. They have a much broader, they are buffeted by pressures from a much wider array of sources than would participants who were purely in the private sector. For this reason, while it would not be uncommon for a private equity firm that invested in a distressed company to take an active role in its ongoing management over a long horizon, we have judged that a different approach is appropriate for government. Our approach focuses on ensuring as a precondition of intervening that appropriate management and governance are in place. It focuses on ensuring up front that a credible and robust restructuring plan is adopted. It is not an approach that seeks to manage its companies or their operations on an ongoing basis. This approach is subject to controversy. For example, there are those who believe that the government should use its stake in automobile companies to advance environmental objectives or to pioneer new management practices. This is not the President's approach. The President believes that automobile companies in areas like CAFE standards or safety should be regulated in the same way by the same agencies, whether or not government has an economic stake in these companies. It would be both politically improper and economically unwise to view interventions in private companies as opportunities to achieve broader policy objectives. And that is why we have insisted on a restructuring of the board of directors and, where appropriate, changes in management, but have resisted, I believe wisely, the temptation to intervene in day-to-day business decisions. These principles, maintaining investments as temporary, following market principles, and being as non-intrusive as possible, they do not assure success, nor do they remove the need for judgment, but they provide a framework in which necessary, painful actions can be taken consistently. It is too early to know how successful our policies have been. It is not even clear how we will know ultimately whether they have succeeded because of the difficulty of constructing a counterfactual and knowing what would have happened without intervention. But if you take one message from what I say today, take this. Only if government is no longer a major presence in these companies in short order will we have fully succeeded in achieving our critical objectives. Some final reflections. It's no accident that there are countless TV dramas about brain surgery and none, to my knowledge, about blood tests. Brain surgery makes for much better drama, though in terms of the ultimate health of the population, the blood tests may be much more important.